But he says, the struggles that we have are small and they won't last very long. Maybe you hear that and you're going, I don't know what Paul's talking about, but my struggles are not small and my struggles feel like they've gone on forever. But sometimes we need a perspective change. Well, hello and welcome to Sunday Morning with Hope Valley Church. I'm Pastor Sam. I'm the lead pastor here at Hope Valley, and today we're continuing in a series we're calling Facing the Storms. Storms are things that happen in our life, times of suffering and struggle and difficulty. And last week we talked about learning to embrace the storms, and today we're going to talk about learning to see hope through the storm. And so there's this statement I really want you to have kind of on the front of your mind as we go through this series today. And that is that the storm that you're facing, right? The storm that I'm facing, the storm many of us are facing, the storm is always changing, isn't it? The storm is always changing, but God is not. Okay, and that's what we're going to talk about today. When we're in the middle of a storm in our life, it's really difficult to see anything else that's going on around us, right? That storm just becomes so prevalent and so, the center of our attention that we just really can't see anything else around us because the storm is big and it's loud and it's noisy and maybe we're really suffering. Maybe we're in a lot of pain. Maybe we're, facing a lot of disappointment, a lot of loss, and it overwhelms our minds. It overwhelms our hearts. And so in the middle of a storm, it feels like all we can see is the storm. And, I can relate to that because, again, early in our marriage, last week I talked to you about, the season where we were just really financially struggling, right? I had some pay structure change at my job and I was just making significantly less money. And we had, one young boy and another one on the way. And, when you're in the middle of a financial struggle like that, it's really kind of hard to think about anything else, right? Because you're so preoccupied, and we're so preoccupied with just how we're going to pay our bills, how we're going to feed our family, that if you came to me in that season and you say, hey Sam, what do you see in 5 years for your family? I'm like, man, I'm hoping that in 5 months my family still has a home. And so because of that storm that I was in, that my wife and I were in together, it was really impossible to look down the road into the future and really see anything else beyond just the difficult season we're in at that time. And I'm not alone, right? We've all been through, again, really terrible storms in our lives, and it's impossible to think sometimes, or at least I should say, it feels impossible to see anything other than that storm. Because part of what happens when we're in the middle of a storm is we begin to kind of see the conditions of that storm as being permanent, right? Like maybe it's difficult right now, but we begin to despair and we begin to believe, oh man, it's always going to be this way, or there's no recovering from this, there's no coming back from this, right? And I'm talking about storms like, again, financial hardship, right? Maybe you've been through that. Maybe broken relationships, maybe injury and disease. Man, that can be really discouraging. What if you have an injury that's really long lasting? Maybe it's permanent. I've known people who've lost limbs. You don't grow those back, right? Or maybe you get a disease or just other conditions that come with age or whatever, and there becomes kind of like this new normal in your life is the way it feels. And so, you're in the middle of these storms and you go, man, this is just, it's always going to be this way. Either you think it's always going to be this way, or you think, it might not always be this way, but I don't think I'm ever going to get back to anything like the joy that I used to have. Similar things can happen. Maybe you have a setback in a career. Maybe you have a death in the family, loss of a loved one or someone really close to you. And so the pain and the struggle of the storm creates kind of a despair for the future, right? And we lose hope that the situation could ever be redeemed, ever be recovered from, that it could ever be reconciled. We begin to lose hope for all of these things. And I've been there, and you've been there, so we know what this is like. We know how a storm has a way of blinding us to anything outside that storm, right? But what does God teach us? How does God teach us to look at the storms in our life? Well, the answer is we look at the storms in our life by looking through the storms in our life. Consider these passages, okay? Let's look first in Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1. It says, "Let us run with endurance the race God has set before us." We do this by keeping our eyes on Jesus, the champion who initiates and perfects our faith. Because of the joy awaiting him, he endured the cross, disregarding its shame, and now he is seated at the place of honor beside God's throne. And I want to pause there because this passage in Hebrews is one example of how, once again, we're taught to look to Jesus as the example and the inspiration for how we live our Christian lives. So we learned this last week as we talked about embracing the storm, and here we see it even more bluntly, right? As the book of Hebrews is referencing back to Jesus' life and saying, listen, you know how horrific crucifixion by Romans is. And Jesus was able to endure that horrific nightmare of a process. He was able to endure it, not by just having a survival mentality, like, I'm going to get through this, I'm going to get through this, I'm going to get through this. No, because his eyes were fixed on a hope that was on the other side of the cross. And so we're told to be like him in this way, to be inspired by him in the same way, to fix our eyes and focus on not just getting through the storm, but on the hope and the joy that is waiting on the other side of that storm. Okay, and we'll talk more in a minute about what that means and how we do that. Okay, but let's continue reading, because here in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 17, this is Paul talking, and he says, "For our present troubles are small and won't last very long." Yeah, I'm going to pause there because Paul's offering a perspective on our struggles that's difficult to have when we're in the middle of them, right? And Paul's writing and saying, listen, the struggles Paul knows he had a really hard life, but he says, the struggles that we have are small and they won't last very long. And maybe you hear that and you're going, I don't know what Paul's talking about, but my struggles are not small and my struggles feel like they've gone on forever. But sometimes we need a perspective change. Again, because when you're in the middle of the storm is all you can see. So let's go back here. Verse 17, "For our present troubles are small and won't last very long. Yet they produce for us a glory that vastly outweighs them and will last forever." So we don't look at the troubles we can now see. Rather, we fix our gaze on things that cannot be seen, for the things we see now will soon be gone. But the things we cannot see will last forever. And it's really important you understand the context of this situation, because Paul isn't writing this letter to a bunch of people where the hardest thing that they have in their life is, Starbucks was out of their particular flavor of coffee that day, or, they were a little bit late to work. I mean, these people were persecuted. There were Christians losing their lives, having family members drug away and executed. I mean, horrific, terrible things, not to mention poverty and storms. I mean, physical, atmospheric storms, just all kinds of stuff, right? And Paul's saying, listen, I know this is intense, but really in the grand scheme of eternity, as we look at everything God is doing, these struggles are small and they won't last very long. And that's why we have to fix our eyes on something beyond the storm. And you see the same idea in Romans 8, verse 18. Paul says, "I consider that our present sufferings cannot even be compared to the glory that will be revealed to us." And I love this last bit of that statement, because Paul's like, listen, God is doing things that are so much greater than we can understand, and we don't even totally know how great it's going to be when it gets here. When God does what he is going to do, we can't even yet see it. It's a glory that is going to be revealed to us. And he says, I don't quite know, I can't quite articulate what that is, but I can say this: I am sure that when we see it, the sufferings we've gone through won't even be worth comparing to it. We won't even try to compare them. We'll go, what sufferings? I'm sorry, I forgot about those. This is so great, so glorious. And so what do we see these passages teaching us? First, once again, that we have to be like Jesus. We have to look through the storm and we have to see past the storm, right? How do we do this? You go, okay, Sam, great, cool. Look past the storm, see through the storm, focus on yeah, awesome. But I don't know how to do that, Sam. I got you. We do this by refusing to accept the temporary suffering that we have as a new normal. The reason that the storm gets you to focus on it is because the storm convinces you that this is just your life now. Nothing's going to get better. Everything's getting worse. And the goal of the enemy of our souls, the goal of the enemy in our storms is to convince us that that storm is the new normal for us. And so we have to refuse to think that way. We have to refuse to accept temporary suffering as a new normal by holding on to the confidence that we have in God's ultimate purpose and plan and promise. Now, this is really hard, by the way, and that's why a lot of people don't do it, right? I'm not telling you that facing storms is easy, right? It's really hard, and a lot of people don't do it because there's things God is doing that we don't yet totally understand and know. But we're told to trust him, have faith in him, fix our eyes on him, fix our eyes on what he's doing in the middle of our storms. And that's why we have to constantly remember that the storm is always changing, but God is not. That's how we do it. The storm is always in motion. It's constantly changing. It's unpredictable, but God is faithful and he's true and he's unchanging. So when I say we have to learn to fix our eyes on the hope on the other side of the storm, we have to fix our eyes on the hope. We have to look through the storm and we have to fix our eyes on hope. You go, what is that hope? The hope is God. The hope is God. His goodness, his faithfulness, his promises. He himself is the hope that we fix our eyes on in the middle of the storm. Look here in 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 19. It says, "So if you are suffering in a manner that pleases God, keep on doing what is right and trust your lives to the God who created you, for he will never fail you." What's interesting about that is that it says, if you're suffering in a manner that pleases God, that means that there's a way that I can go about suffering that doesn't please him. Like just having a survival mentality. Like just falling for the lie that the suffering I'm currently facing is the new normal of my life, that things can't be redeemed, that things can't be healed, that I can't ever be stronger after this. None of those things are true if God is true. And so suffering in a manner that pleases God means that I'm suffering as I fix my eyes on him. And you might say, Sam, what is God going to do through the storm? How is he going to bring this all around? I don't know. I don't know. I just know him, right? We can just know him. We don't always know what he's going to do, but we can know him. And that's who we fix our eyes on in the middle of the storms in our life. So in your present storm, here's my challenge for you today. I want you to learn to look past the storm. Okay? And the storm that you're currently facing or that you soon will face, learn to look past the storm and focus on Jesus. You have to reject the survival mentality. And here's why. Because the survival mentality, the idea of like, I just want to get through it, I just want to survive, that is like the most minimum level of hope that you can have, right? If the biggest hope that you have is just not dying, that's like the most minimum level of hope that you can have. And settling for that kind of minimum level of hope causes spiritual blindness, right? In other words, it makes it almost impossible for you to see God. And it creates despair. And both of those things only make you weaker. So you've got to reject the survival mentality. You've got to determine today, I'm never going to go through another storm in my life with no goal higher than just surviving. Another thing you have to do is you have to stop stewing in pain and despair that surrounds you in the storm, right? Listen, the storm is going to try and get you to think about everything that you're sad about, everything that's hurting you, every lost hope that you've had, every loss that you've endured. It's going to try and get you to focus and stew and camp on that. And you just have to make a decision, I'm not going to do it. Yes, it's hard, but I'm going to stop focusing on the pain. I'm going to stop focusing on the disappointment. I'm going to stop focusing on the way that people have let me down. I'm going to stop focusing on the way that I've lost things and people that I care deeply about. I know it hurts. Of course it hurts. But I'm going to stop stewing on it. Because when you stew on it, you weaken yourself. You fix your eyes on the storm instead of fixing your eyes on God through the storm. And so thirdly, you have to hold on to what God has said to you. God has spoken. He has said things to you. I know it's true. You have to hold on to what He has said, and you have to trust Him with whatever the outcome may be, which also means resisting the urge to prescribe solutions to God and tell Him what outcomes ought to be. You can certainly tell Him what you want the outcomes to be. That's fine. But then you have to submit to Him, whatever they may be, because your trust, again, is not in God doing what you want. Your trust is in God being who He is, and He's good, and He's faithful, and He doesn't change. I've had suffering. I have suffering in my life right now. I'm sure you do too. These are really difficult emotional topics. I understand that. And I'm not telling you any of this is easy. It certainly isn't easy. Everyone would be doing it if it were. I'm just saying that it's the right way to go about it. It's the healthy way to go about it. It's the way that will take you through a storm, and the purpose of the storm will be accomplished, and you'll come out and you'll be stronger, and you'll be more full of hope, more full of faith, more pleasing to God, and more encouraging and supportive to other people. I mean, so many benefits can happen in you through a storm that you don't want to squander it by just surviving it. So we got to see the hope through the storm. And if we could all do this, and I know it's hard, right? But let's just dream for a moment. Like, what would it look like if we all began to see the hope through the storm? I think we would be ready and able to strengthen one another in times of need. By the way, side note, you can't go through storms alone. If you're doing that, there's your problem. That's probably why you feel the way you do, right? You're meant to go through storms together, to other people support you. And if you learn in your life to see the hope through the storm, you'll be somebody that can support other people in the middle of their storms, right? And I think we would also see, we would draw our communities toward hoping in Jesus. Even people who don't follow the Lord, who maybe don't even believe any of this stuff. But if they see you, if they see us facing really hard times, full of hope, full of strength, full of perseverance, that is going to grab attention. That is going to be a greater testimony than anything else that you could say to them, because they would see the power and the Spirit of God in action in His people. Okay? So many wonderful benefits could come from us all learning together to look through the storm and focus on Jesus, because the storm is always changing, but God is not. Before we go today, I have some questions again, some devotional questions. I really invite you to write down, think about, pray through this week, to just go deeper with some of the things that we've talked about today. And the first one is, in what ways might you be choosing to merely survive your storms? Be specific about that. Secondly, in a present or recent storm, what opportunities are there for you to see God's love more clearly? And thirdly, how can trusting God in a deeper way change your perspective on the storms in your life? I know the answer to those questions may not be immediately obvious, and that's why I want you to think about it. I want you to pray about it. I want you to go deeper, because again, this is really important, but it's really difficult, right? Because we're talking about some of the darkest, most painful times of our lives and changing the way that we think about them and look at them and engage them. So I know this is some hard stuff, but it's going to require some time in prayer, some time in reflection, thinking through some of these things, because the scripture is very clear on what it teaches us, right? We embrace storms, we see hope through the storms, and then we leverage those storms. We're going to talk about that in the next video. But it's hard stuff. So take the time this week to pray and reflect on these things and go a little bit deeper. All right. Well, I really do hope that this lesson has been a blessing and really been helpful for you today. And I'm just thankful for you just spending the time to be with us. And we just pray that God would bless you, be with you in the middle of your current storm, and bring His people around you to support you and help you during whatever you may be facing. So until next time, have a great day. We love you. Bye-bye.
We are so glad you've joined us today. To learn more about Hope Valley Church and get access to free resources, just go to www.hopevalley.church. There, you will also find links to connect with us on Facebook and Instagram, as well as links to our podcasts, now available on Apple, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. And if you're watching this on YouTube, please take a moment to like and subscribe so you can stay up with new videos coming out every week. Hope Valley is a church based in Winchester, Virginia that meets in homes around the region. So if you'd like to find out more about home churches, how they work, and how to locate one near you, just go to hopevalley.church/house. Thanks again for joining us, and may God bless you today.